So now that we want to add some velocity to it, we need to find a way to add velocity under where the cursor is and leave the velocity as it is, or even add a drag to it, away from the cursor. And so let's create a blend, and the blend is going to be between two values, the velocity under the cursor and the velocity away from the cursor. And the mask for this blend is going to be the ramp multiplied by this random, which is going to add some randomness to it. And so we're going to blend between the velocity of the previous frame and the velocity that is everywhere and the velocity that is under the cursor, which is going to be a new parameter for that. So we're going to call it mouse velocity. And it's also going to be a vector 3, and I'm going to plug it like that. And then we're going to apply this velocity on the position, but before we're going to use the compute velocity, which is going to be like this, and we're going to create another global, so that I could plug this one, but it would kind of create spaghettis. So I'm going to plug this here, and that will go onto the position. And I also need to make sure that I always keep this this velocity, so I'm going to plug that here. And actually I'm going to put a null here, so it's going to be easier to add nodes in between. There you go. So now I also want to give a value to this. So if I look here, I can see that it has 0, 0, and I again want to use the picker node on this one. So you can see that below the position there is a velocity where I can see how fast or in which direction the mouse cursor moves. So I'm going to copy this one again, and I'm going to go back to the particle, and I'm going to copy this one here. And I do not have this, so I'm going to copy it as relative. And that, let's play what we have now. So we can see that now we start to have some movement. It goes a bit all over the place, so let's first start by adding a drag to it. So what I want to do is subtract or multiply by a value of less than 1 the velocity of the previous frame, so which is this one. So I'm just going to apply a mult here. Oh, let me actually add this one. Not many differences, but I kind of prefer it sometime. And I'm going to multiply it by, let's say, 0.9. And now if I play this, you should see that everything slows down. And now it still goes crazy sometimes if I move the cursor too fast. So I'm going to just apply a clamp here to make it a little more controllable. And make sure it's between -1 and 1. Like this. So now it works alright, but I can see that all the points that are dragging are going to be the small ones, and the points that are moving the most are the large ones. That's not what I really want, and the reason is probably because I am using the same default random seed here on this random I'm using in the material that defines the scale. So if I were to do that, the randomness is becoming a little more interesting. But no, the problem is that the text never comes back to its original shape, and I want that. So I want to be able to say if the particles haven't been touched by the cursor for X amount of frames, then they should go back to their original position. So one way to do that is to track a state. So I'm going to simply create another attribute. Let's call it state. And I'm going to update it on every frame. So that's my attribute in, previous frame, and attribute out, what I'm writing to. And I'm going to add a value, and that value is going to be the ramp where the cursor is, the distance to the cursor. So I'm going to do this, add this one here, and add this one here. Now the problem with the technique like that is it's very abstract. We can't really visually see what we're doing. There is no feedback, no immediate feedback. But one good way to see the value of the attribute is to simply go into the material and pipe it into the color. So right now we are piping the HSV to RGB into the color, but I want to pipe the attribute state. Attribute state. So I'm gonna use a float to vec3, and I'm gonna put it here. I'm gonna put a complement so that when it's 0 it becomes green. Make sure the blue is at 0, and what we should see now is it should become red when we move the cursor. It doesn't, so I may have done something wrong. So if I go back into the particles, I can see that this one did not export, so now I should do that, and here you go. So now we can see that particles become red, the state becomes 1 when I touch them with a mouse cursor, but it never comes back to an inactive state. And a way to do that is to simply remove some value from this. So we're gonna remove a tiny value, let's say 0.04, and now what we should see is the particles becoming green again, and which is what they do. So now we're going to use this value as a blend between the current position and the original position. But the problem is we do not have the original position when we are at frame X. If we are to get the position attribute, it only is the current position. So we need to store that into another attribute. So I'm going to create the attribute here, attribute create. I'm going to call it rest p, and I'm going to make it a 3 float, and I'm going to copy the position into it. I'm going to copy the position into rest p, and I need to make sure that I export it here, that we have the rest p here, and now if I go back here, I need to import it, rest p here, and I want to use this value as a blend between rest p and this position. Now what is a blend? It's not going to be this one directly, so this value is starting at 1 when we just touch it, and it keeps decreasing to 0 and then to negative values, and that's what I want. I want to use those negative values. So in order to make it between 0 and 1, which was a blend accept, I need to use negate, and I probably will use a clamp so I don't use values that are too high. And now I should do that here, and I will then replace this here in the position. So now let's play that, and we can see that the particles come back into shape. Now they do not come back in a very organic way, so I do want to add a bit more randomness again. So the same randomness I was using here, I will again use a different seed, and I will pipe that into this value, which is how fast the state decreases back. And I'm going to use a fit, and I want values which are close to this one, but with a variance to it. So I'm going to say between 0.06 and 0.02, and I'm going to pipe this here. So now if we were to play this, we can see some particles come back fast, some less fast. And it's probably time to go back to the material and reuse the color that we had. We do not need to debug anymore. And here you go, we have the particle system, and the text comes back into shape. It probably could come back a little faster. So maybe this could be increased. That's nice. So if I were to debug this and put everything to the same value, we have this back. And so maybe I just want to have them go even faster. That's probably right. So yeah, I guess it is the kind of situation where there is plenty of things that can be tweaked to get whatever look and feel you want. That's probably a good start to understand how most of the principles are working. Thank you for watching.